and welcome to the Family Table. The Family Table is a teaching kitchen owned and operated by the Salvation Army Harrisburg. My name is Megan Zook, and I'm a registered dietitian and a community health and nutrition coordinator for the Salvation Army. Welcome to the 5th lesson in the Eat Healthy, Be Active curriculum series. If this is your first time tuning in with us and you haven't watched lesson 1, 2, 3, or 4, pause this video and first go watch those 4 videos before coming in here with me on lesson 5. So today, to get us started, I want to get us started with 2 reminders that we always start off with first. So please like and comment on this video so that we know that you were here with us today. Also, if you haven't already, please go to the Family Table Harrisburg to our Facebook and Instagram pages and like those pages as well, because we post a lot of helpful content there about healthy recipes and ways to overall live a healthier lifestyle. So to get us started today, I want to talk a little bit about a whole grain. So what is the deal with whole grain or whole wheat foods? So I have a diagram here to talk about whole grains, and I want to go over the 3 parts of a whole grain. So the 3 parts of a whole grain are the bran, the endosperm, and the germ. Okay? All 3 parts of that whole grain are ground up and used in whole grain foods. Now, if you were eating a food that is not a whole grain, that food would just have the endosperm, and those would be grains that are enriched, or like white bread or plain white rice. So those are foods that are not whole grain foods. But why does it matter whether we eat grains that are whole versus not, especially when it seems like whole grain foods have a different texture? Well, whole grain foods, that bran that's included on the outside of the whole grain in that food product, gives us a lot of fiber. Fiber is very important for our bodies, and we may have already talked about it before in some previous lessons. Fiber helps our digestive system, and it keeps us regular. It reduces our chance of colon cancer by keeping our digestive system properly functioning. Fiber also keeps us full longer. So if there is not fiber in a meal, that means that we could tend to get hungry sooner than we should, because all of that food has cleared out of our digestive system and our stomach is empty, we're ready to eat again. So for people who are trying to lose weight, fiber is recommended by scientists and dietitians and doctors because it helps keep us satisfied in between meals, and it helps us from snacking or eating our next meal sooner than we really need to. Fiber literally slows down how long it takes things to digest. So by having a longer digestion time in your body, you're not going to need to eat as soon. So fiber is good for weight loss. I have some foods here in front of me that are whole wheat or whole grain foods, and you'll hear me use that terminology kind of interchangeably. Whole wheat and whole grain foods are the same type of foods, the foods that include all 3 parts of that grain. Whole grain or whole wheat bread is one example of something I have here. I have brown rice. Brown rice is a whole grain, and I have whole grain pasta here. So how do we know if our foods are whole grain, if we're really trying to get some of that extra fiber? This is literally what we have to do to find out if foods are whole grain. We have to look at the nutrition facts label on the food, and we have to look at the ingredient list. The very first ingredient of the ingredient list should say whole grain or whole wheat, or if it is rice or pasta, it may say brown rice or brown pasta. But something that would indicate to us if it's not a whole grain would be if you see the words enriched or multigrain, or gosh, I can't even think of anything else at the moment, but unless you're seeing whole grain, whole wheat, or the word brown as the very first ingredient, that item is not a whole grain, whole wheat product. And it's important for it to be the very first ingredient as well. If you see whole wheat, whole grain later on in the ingredients list, it still means that that product is not a whole grain product. Okay, so you can look at the front of a package. Sometimes it'll tell you if it's a whole grain or whole wheat product, but you always want to double check that ingredients list just to be sure. Okay? Now, some people just don't like the taste or the texture of whole grain products. And honestly, you don't always need to eat whole wheat or whole grain products, but try to do so 50% of the time. So we have a saying here at the Salvation Army that we tell our kids, try to make half your grains whole. So out of all the grain products that you eat throughout the day, try to just make half of your choices a whole grain, okay? So if whole wheat pasta is really not something that you want to get on board with, that's okay. Can you always try to have whole wheat bread or brown rice instead? So kind of pick and choose your battles with the grains there. Try to make half your grains whole. Let's get started with our lesson. Today's workshop and handouts will give you tips for losing weight and maintaining a healthy weight. This workshop is based on the Dietary Guidelines for Americans and the Physical Activity Guidelines for Americans. The dietary guidelines provide science-based advice for making food choices that promote good health and a healthy weight and help prevent disease. The Physical Activity Guidelines provides recommendations on the amount, types, and level of intensity of physical activity needed to achieve and maintain good health. Our objectives today will be the following. Identify 5 concepts of a healthy lifestyle. Identify the 5 food groups and a healthy choice from each. Identify 5 aspects of the nutrition facts label that make it easier for you to make informed food choices that support a healthy diet. If you haven't already, please go online with the link below and download today's lesson handout. The handouts start on page 15. Page 17 shows us how to make healthy eating part of our lifestyle. Make it into a habit. Dwayne was overwhelmed with how to make healthy changes in his diet. He didn't know where to start. Then he talked to his dietitian and realized that healthy eating is simpler than he once thought. Instead of treating foods as good or bad, he started to think that some foods are healthier than others, and the overall goal is to try to eat healthier foods more often and less healthy foods less often. He focused on using MyPlate to help him remember to eat from the 5 food groups, and he used the food label to help him consume less added sugar, less saturated fat, and less sodium. He also made a commitment to himself to try to make changes for his health. During week 1, Dwayne focused on eating more fruits and veggies. A helpful way to try to eat more fruits and veggies is to include them in your meal plan, something we talked about 2 weeks ago. Something we talked about at the beginning of our lesson series was chopping up containers of veggies to keep in the fridge at all times and keep a bowl of fruit on the table at home. During week 2, Dwayne tried whole grains instead of his usual refined grains. He did say that it took some getting used to, but after a while he didn't mind whole grains at all. This is quite common for our taste buds because they can change when presented with new tastes and textures multiple times in a row. Remember, you don't need to make all your grains whole, but try to do that for half the grains that you eat. During week 3, he cut back on sodium and sugar. One of the easiest cuts was his daily soft drink. Remember, we talked about foods high in added sugar and sodium during week 1. Then during week 4, Dwayne put his new changes together and started performing them so frequently they became his new normal. They became his habit. Dwayne went through lots of changes all at one time. I would recommend that if this seems overwhelming to you, try one change for several weeks before moving on to adding another change. That way you can plan for your change as soon as it becomes habits and then have some brain space to work on another change and turn that one into a habit. For example, I recommend starting with eating more fruits and vegetables. Try one specific action with this, like having them chopped up and on hand at all times, or by making sure that every planned meal has a fruit and a vegetable with it. Once you have done this for a while, and it's second nature to you or a habit, move on to trying another change and turning that into a habit. I often sound like a broken record when I talk about using MyPlate to help you remember to eat all 5 food groups, but I really think that it's a helpful visual that we all can learn from. So just as a reminder, there are 5 food groups. We have our vegetables, our fruits, our protein, our grains, and our dairy. Now, to dive a little bit deeper into each of these food groups, we want to eat healthy foods. We don't want to eat processed foods in the form of MyPlate. That's not going to do us any good. So just as a reminder, healthy fruits and vegetables that you can eat can be fresh, canned, or frozen. Remember though, if there are canned fruits and vegetables that you're eating, for vegetables, pour off the water that they're canned in so that you aren't consuming all that sodium that the vegetable was canned with. You can also select a low sodium can to begin with and then also pour the water off. As an additional measure, if you're being very careful with your sodium intake, you can rinse the veggies before eating them. With your fruit is not canned in salt water, it's canned in sugar water often, or it's canned in its own natural juices. So with fruit, try again when you purchase fruit to purchase fruit that's canned either in its own natural juices or in light syrup. Stay away from fruit canned in heavy syrup. Also still pour off the juice or the syrup or whatever the fruit is with. And if you're not concerned about your fruit breaking up because it's a little bit gentle, you can also rinse your fruit as an extra measure to take away some of that sugary water. Frozen vegetables and fruits are completely good to eat as well. I would just say sometimes with frozen fruit, you'll see that fruit has been frozen with added sugar. That's not super common anymore, but just make sure that in the ingredients list on the back of the bag of frozen fruit that you select, it just says fruit. It doesn't have any added sugars to it. Okay, protein. Protein is my favorite, well, I don't actually have a favorite. Protein is one of my favorite food groups to talk about because there are so many different proteins, and there are so many proteins that are non-meat proteins just waiting for you to discover and to enjoy. I do recommend consuming both meat and non-meat proteins during the week because each has its own set of nutrients that are beneficial to your body. But I definitely recommend not only eating red meat all week or meat that's really high in saturated fat or that's really processed like bologna or lunch meat, because processed meat is high in saturated fat and sodium. So vary your protein routine, okay? So you can have red meat a couple times a week, you can have white meat a couple times a week, and then you can have non-meat proteins a couple times a week, like beans, tofu, eggs, nuts, seeds, things like that. So just vary your protein routine. That's a tongue twister, it's hard to say. Grains, we talked about grains. I want you to make half your grains whole. See, also recognize the size of these food groups and how they take up the plate. Fruits and vegetables, half of your plate, okay? Protein, less than a quarter of your plate. We often overdo the protein as Americans. And grains, a smidge over half of your plate. A quarter of your plate. And last but not least, dairy. Dairy has natural saturated fats in it, especially if we get whole milk. Good thing though, we have fat-free and 1% milk that we can always consume to have less saturated fat. If you are lactose intolerant, simply get lactose-free milk, or you can try soy milk, almond milk, cashew milk, whatever they have out there. All of those substitute milks still have the calcium and the vitamin D that our bodies need to strengthen bones. So, use MyPlate. You should have gotten tons of handouts with that little MyPlate symbol on it by now. This is a really great tool to help remind us that it's important to eat all 5 food groups so that we get all the nutrients that our body needs, and this is helpful to show us how much of each food group to eat. So page 25 and 26 talk a little bit about the quantities of each food group that you consume each day. So if looking at MyPlate doesn't work for you to help give you an idea of how much food to have each day, this should give you another helpful idea of how much food to have each day based off of a 2,000 calorie diet, okay? That's all the examples we give you are based off of that 2,000 calories. So I have this in front of me because it's hard to remember the exact numbers, but each day it's recommended for 2,000 calories that we consume 2 servings of fruit. 1 serving looks just like this, all right? So 2 peaches would be your fruit for all the fruit that you need for the day. Now for vegetables, it says consume 2.5 servings of vegetables each day. Oop, that's not a veggie. So I have right here some carrots, some cut up carrots, and these carrots are about 1/2 cup is what this is. So 1/2 cup of carrots that are cooked like this counts as 1 serving, and it's recommended we get 2.5 servings a day. This is cooked spinach, okay, and this is about 1 serving of what cooked spinach would look like. So you'll see that it's typically stuff that like fits in the palm of your hand is generally what a serving is. Now for, and if it's leafy salad greens, like 2 cups of leafy salad greens are the serving size that's recommended to get 1 serving. And that's because, you know, salad greens, they have lots of air in between each leaf. So you can see how you'd have to have more salad greens than just a half a cup to equal 1 serving. All right, next, let's talk about grains. So it says to consume 6 servings of grains a day, which should be no problem for most of us. So 1 serving, it could be 1 slice of whole grain bread, it could be 1 portion of whole grain cereal, or some rice, or some pasta. Again, a serving is typically 1/2 of a cup, so something that can fit in the palm of your hand. All right, each day consume 5.5 servings of protein. So let's look at the protein examples that I have here. So this is 1 serving of salmon. Okay, again, look, palm of my hand is what that fits in. This is 1 serving of meatloaf, fits in the palm of my hand. Beans fit in my hand. I also have peanut butter. So if you've ever read the peanut butter label, nutrition label for peanut butter, it says 2 tablespoons. So 2 tablespoons is 1 serving, and this is what 1 tablespoon looks like. If you are somebody who eats a half a cup of peanut butter every time you eat it, pay attention. 2 of these is 1 serving of peanut butter, which is 1 serving of protein. All right, and last but not least, we have dairy foods. The recommendation for dairy is 3 servings a day, and each serving should be the size of 1 cup. So here is 1 cup of yogurt. If you had a cup of milk that was this exact same size, that would be another serving as well. So 3 of those are recommended a day. So the second to last thing that we're going to talk about today is the food label handout that you have. Let's talk about how to read a food label. I think we've touched on this already before in one of our previous lessons, but you'll find the food label is on page, let's see. Okay, your food label is on page 27. So let's talk about this food label a little bit. So when you're using the food label to determine serving sizes and calories and to get a better idea of how much food you're eating, you want to pay attention to a couple of things. You first want to see, you want to look at the serving size to determine how many servings you are actually eating, or how many servings you should eat. Often people will get a reasonably sized container, think that that container is meant to be consumed all at one time, and then later, or never, realize that there were multiple servings and they were having more calories and more servings than they should have been having. So make sure that you see here, this has 2 servings per container, not 1, and each serving is 1.5 cups. So if you were to eat that whole container, you would be having 3 cups of the food, not 1.5 cups. You also want to choose foods that have no added sugars or are low in added sugars. So you'll see under here, we have 2 grams of added sugars to our food label. Added sugars, just for your information, are sugars that have been added during processing or packaging. Getting more than 100% of the daily value for added sugars makes it difficult to meet nutrient needs without consuming too many calories. So you'll see that this gives us 4% of the daily value that we need of added sugars, or the daily value that we don't want to go over, because you do not need any added sugars for a healthy diet. We also want to use the food label to look for foods that are low in saturated and trans fats. Okay, so here we'll see that there's 1.5 grams of saturated fat, 8% of the max daily value, and no grams of trans fat, which is good. You want to choose healthier fats if possible, okay? So the food label will never tell you this, but healthy fats are fats that are called unsaturated fats, okay? And those are typically found in fish, nuts, and vegetable oils. You also want to use this label to compare sodium levels in different products and choose whatever food has lower amounts of sodium in it. So this food has 430 milligrams of sodium per one serving, and that's 19% of the max daily value of sodium that we want to have. So keep that in mind. If you have a choice between two products, you want to choose the one that's lower in sodium. Most sodium does come from foods that are processed, so the lower processed foods should have less sodium in them. Okay? And there's so much more I could tell you about a nutrition label, but these are just a couple of things here. You'll want to make sure you read over this page 27 handout so that you can see what else you could know that would help you pick healthier options for foods when you're in the grocery store. So before we end our lesson today, I just want to ask you all how you're doing with your physical activity levels. So, being healthy includes two things: making sure that you're eating healthy and making sure that you're taking care of your physical health. So part of taking care of your physical health is participating in physical activity. So if you have been making dietary changes, but you have still been sedentary and sitting a lot and not moving around, it's time to make a change with that. You'll be surprised at how your body starts to look and feel when you start adding more physical activity to it. So something to think about is to make sure that you're getting 150 minutes of moderate intensity activity each week. And as a bonus, we want to try to do, I think we talked about this last week, 2 times a week of muscle strengthening activities, all right? And that is just simply to help our muscles stay fit so that we can walk, we can sit and then stand up again properly, and we have good balance so that as we age, we aren't prone to falling, which can often lead to breaking a hip, breaking a knee, breaking your spine, things that we just don't want as we age. So I'm challenging you all, if you have not started incorporating physical activity into your lifestyle, now is the time to do it. Okay, thank you for joining me for today's lesson. I'll see you guys next week for our final lesson together in the Eat Healthy, Be Active curriculum series. Have a nice day.